Wait a minute. Staying in
Hey,
this meeting.
well, Coach, good to see you.
Hold on here. Yeah,
Hear me?
likewise. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Thanks for the invite. I'm still not convinced that anybody wants to hear anything that I have to say other than maybe a few former players, and they already know it.
Well, I've had a few requests for you, but also Dave Boyer, who was a basketball coach at Robinson when you were a football coach, for, at least for a while. He said,
Yes.
Julian, you've all these Woodson people, Mount Vernon people, TC. We're the Robinson people. That's where you went to school. So I know Coach Boyer will be very happy as well.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Just quickly, I know your brother Pete has been watching what we're doing, Coach Pete Bendorf. We started a Facebook group during the lockdown, kind of to pass some time, but also we created this community of ex-basketball players that we discussed the great games, great players, great officials, great coaches, all that, great moments. And it's been a great way to reconnect. And then Carlton Phelps, who played against you at West Potomac, who was also a great basketball player, he kept saying, Julian, you got to do a football group. And I said, I didn't play a lot of football in high school, but I said, I'll tell you what, I'll help get this thing started with you guys. And again, the football community has been just as strong. I think a couple months in, we already got like 800 members and lots of activity. So, but anyway, you're a coach that people have been asking to hear from. You're a huge winner in the area. Also, I understand you're a great track and field coach and developed some state champions in that as well. But I wanted to start with you. Maybe go back to the beginning a little bit. I know you probably came of age, at least watching football, probably in the mid to late '60s. So you probably grew up in the Vince Lombardi days, run the daylight years of the mid '60s, and then Vince Lombardi came to the Redskins right about the time you were going to high school. And then right after that, George Allen took over at Washington because Coach Lombardi died of cancer. But he brought in all these charismatic veterans like Billy Kilmer, Sonny Jurgensen, Chris Hamburger, Roy Jefferson. I guess Charlie Taylor might have already been here. But anyway, it was a great time to be a football fan and to learn the game. And, football was in the midst of becoming our national pastime from baseball. So is that how you became to love football? And maybe you can take us back to how you started becoming a fan of the game.
Well, I think the game kind of found me as opposed to the other way around. And my dad was military, so we moved around quite a bit. And before coming to Virginia, we'd been in the Midwest, and there's, that's Nebraska football out there. So I can remember, my earliest recollections were on Saturday with my dad watching college football. And, I'd heard Andy Heck talk, and much like him, I was pretty good size as a youngster. So I didn't get involved with youth football because I'd have played with kids, 2 grades ahead of me that I didn't know. Now, my brother played every youth sport there is. And, that was a lot of fun to watch him. But I didn't get really serious about organized sports until I got to high school. Now, in the Midwest, they have the elementary schools had track teams. And so that was kind of my first exposure. I could run a little bit and jump a little bit, but I'd always liked all sports.
Okay. So when did you guys, I know you're in Nebraska, and I guess that was probably even before Tom Osborne, right? So who was the Nebraska? Who was in those Nebraska teams?
Oh gosh, I don't know, but Nebraska has sold out every home game since 1962. They're very passionate. And Tom Osborne, you're right, he won 3 national championships, but that was in the 90s. So that was kind of after that time.
Yeah, I was an Oklahoma fan. Sorry, I was with Billy Sims and what was the guy I played for the Colts and then the Redskins? Joe Washington. That was my team. So when did you guys move? When did you guys move to DC?
We moved to DC. I was in 6th grade, and I started at Marshall in the early 70s. I went to Joyce Kilmer Middle School, which incidentally, back then for X County, the middle schools had track teams too. I remember a county meet with Thoreau, Kilmer, and I think Glasgow, and you won't believe it, but I won the county high jump championship.
That's right. Yeah.
Not very high, but so I was into sports, but it really kind of, when I got to Marshall, that's when it got serious.
It's kind of a shame about track and field because there's so much time put into other sports. Like, I have young kids and you put them in soccer first, and some of them gravitate towards basketball and football and stuff. Track and field is, probably the least expensive sport. And it's the simplest of sports. It's just pure you against me often. And it's a shame that we kind of neglect it these days.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think because it was easy to organize and do and didn't cost anything, I think, that's absolutely the case. But, the youth programs in Northern Virginia were really booming in the 70s then as the population was expanding. So like Vienna youth, which was where we grew up in Vienna, all the Vienna youth teams were very good. And as I said, my brother came up through all those. And, it kind of coincided with, Marshall becoming a power because when I was in 8th grade, Marshall was 2-8 in football. My freshman year, we won the region, beat Edison 26-2, I believe. So, it was kind of a transition time in Northern Virginia.
Who was the coach at Marshall when you first got there? Was Ed Henry already the coach?
Ed Henry was, yeah. He hadn't been the coach long. He was maybe in his maybe 3rd year, something like that. Mm-hmm. And, what I'll say about Coach Henry, and I'm sure you were going to ask me, is, if nothing else, he was innovative because if you recall in the 60s, the wishbone was pretty popular down in Texas, and I think maybe Oklahoma might have been running it. But the problem with the wishbone is the defenses has caught up a little bit. And with the 3 backs, the defenses were really compressed into the box. And I think Coach Henry was looking for a way to do something that maybe people hadn't seen in the Northern region. And my understanding is he took the staff and went down to Houston where they were running the veer, Bill Yeoman, I believe it was. And he came up and put in the veer, which allows you to have a flanker, wide receiver, a tight end, and 2 backs. So you didn't get such a congested box. And people had no idea how to defend us. And like I said, we instantly had success.
Yeah, I remember when I'm getting ahead of myself, but when I played freshman in JV for Hilbert was one of my coaches, and Bob Menifee, who you may have known, was a longtime baseball coach, was a freshman coach. But we ran the wing tee for Coach Henry, and it was every play looked the same. So you had that action, I guess we call it the waggle or whatever, but you fake the dive, you fake the sweep, you fake the reverse, and then you can go long. But you had 3 options, and we called it in the huddle. Like you didn't have the quarterback didn't have the option on the field to change it up. But teams struggled with us because our offense was very intricate, and at least it seemed intricate at the time. Probably, nowadays looking back, it's probably pretty simplistic.
Yeah, but it's still hard to defend because there's so much pulling, there's so much misdirection, there's a lot of angle blocking. So it still presents a challenge now, particularly in this time when most people are spread and the run game is a zone blocking, which is not complicated. It's why it's popular because it can take into account a lot of defensive configurations. And people that have run the wing tee successful have, had a lot of success. And because people don't see it as regularly, it's maybe even more successful. But it has its drawbacks too.
When you look at coaches like yourself, actually, because you've been retired for a bit here, when you think of it and the guys you learned from as well, do you think they would have been just as successful today in a day of analytics and the game is different? Do you think a good coach adjusts to the time and would find a way, or do you think it's coaching today as a different in some ways a different skill set than it was back in the 60s and 70s?
Well, it's definitely a different skill set, but the answer to your question is whether they, just like a player from that era put into this era, whether they're willing to adjust. Because if you look at the coaches that have had long time success and stayed in a long time, it's been about adjusting. But I will say this, Julian, and I know this could be a separate podcast. People ask all the time, how has the game changed? The fundamentals of the game are still the same in terms it's a territorial game. It's moving the ball down the field. And things, the methodology changes and then comes back around. So, what happens is there are offensive innovations, and then the defense catches up, and then the offense innovates again. Um, However, football at its essence is still about offensively about execution. No matter what you do, you can have success. I was never one of those coaches that felt there was only one way to do it. So it's still about on defense teaching players to run to the ball, get lined up, how to get off a block, pass defense, offensively, getting people blocked at the line of scrimmage or protecting the quarterback, getting people open. Those things are still the same, but how you do it's different. And when I look at the game, you know, people say, okay, well, the option was popular in the 60s and 70s. Nobody's running that anymore. That's wrong. Everybody's running it. You just don't recognize it. The zone read is the option out of gun. The jet motion, what some people call the Husker option, where you get motion across and you fake the jet sweep, that's an option. So, and now you hear a lot about RPO, that's run pass option. People are still utilizing the option. You don't see as much in the NFL because you're not going to take a multi-million-dollar quarterback and have him run the ball all the time. But in college football, most of the better teams have mobile quarterbacks. So the game has changed, but it hadn't changed. It just looks different. The biggest, if I had to, not to get off on a tangent, but I'd say the biggest change that I saw wasn't the spread, the empty, the no huddle, because those had been periodically come in. It was tempo. That was what you did not see in the 70s and 80s so much, was people going fast. And you even saw Nick Saban was kind of reluctant to get on board with that. Even at one point said he thought it was dangerous. And then Lane Kiffin came in and they all of a sudden went up tempo. So that's probably the biggest change that I've seen to the game.
How about coaches? Do coaches work harder today with all the analytics and stuff that they have? Or is their day longer now than it was 40 years ago or 50 years ago?
Absolutely. There's absolutely no question in that. Football, even at the NFL level back in the 70s, was a seasonal thing. Certainly in the high school, you ended your season, you went to your other sport, see you in August. Not in every place. I mean, we at Marshall, we had a weightlifting program, but it was a small room with a universal gym. But now the job of head coach, there's even very few head high school coaches that are classroom teachers anymore because of the time demands on coaching. And that's from recruiting. College recruiting has gotten so much bigger. Strength and conditioning, the passing leagues, all of the things that it's been a year-round. The demands have been year-round since I got into it. Truly, I didn't. We were every year. It seemed like we were putting more hours in than we had the year before. So definitely the demands have changed for the players too.
So it'd be tough. It'd be tough to teach 5 history classes, coach baseball in the spring, and maybe even do indoor track in the winter for a football coach today.
Absolutely, because you talk about Ed Henry, he coached a little bit of JV baseball in the spring, and that wasn't unusual. And like you said, some were classroom teachers, but the only way that could be accomplished now is if a coach had the type of staff where he could delegate some of those things, a dedicated strength coach, run his weight room, 1 or 2 guys, and some of those things. But you've seen a lot of coaches in the northern region who started out as classroom teachers, and only a few of them still are, because of it is, what I calculated, we were probably working about 85 hours a week. So, and that's a lot of hours. It really is. You
too bad it wasn't.
Now, and there are guys that work less and have success. Maybe we just weren't. Maybe I wasn't as smart, so I had to put in more hours.
What do you think about the Texas model, where maybe it exists elsewhere, where they pay public schools can pay high school football coaches a lot of money, and they just coach football? Would you be on board with that?
Yeah, I do, because the job should be paid commensurate with the demands of the jobs and the expectation. And when you think about it, as a head coach, you're overseeing 3 levels of football, and that could be anywhere from 100 to 200 players, depending on your school. It is a year-round endeavor. So, uh, at the very least, high school coaches in Northern Virginia and Fairfax County, um, there's not longevity steps. Now it's starting, they're talking about it. So, in other words, a brand new 27-year-old head coach would make the same as Mike Skinner with 40 years of head coaching experience. That's ludicrous. So, there should at least be some longevity steps in it. And I think it should also be factored into retirement because it's part of your income. Being a football coach, given the year-round demands of it, is a part of your career. So
Yeah.
I do think that, but I know there's a lot of politics involved with that. But I think
Yeah,
the
and
states that do that, like Texas, where you can, just like in a college program, you're just the football coach. I think they have it right.
yeah, and we're going to get back to the issue of whether or not the retirement incentives incentivize great leaders like yourself to get out of the game early when they still have, they have
Mhm.
quite a few years left to give to these kids. But we'll get to that. Let's get back to Marshall for a minute.
Yep.
So did you? So the team turned around, and so your freshman year, did you play? Did you play freshman or soft or JV or because I know you were a big kid. You're a big kid growing up.
Well, you'll have to, if you talk to my brother, you'll have to get this. He actually took the phone call in the summer after eighth grade. Um, I got a call. I wasn't home. My brother took a call and I got invited out to the varsity. They just about three or four of us were invited to come out early. And what they had done is they had gone through our physical fitness scores from middle school. And, your 50-yard dash, standing broad jump, your shuttle run, 600 and all that, and also had your height and weight on there. And they wanted to know our cleat size because they would, buy the shoes. We had these old ugly blue Pumas. So I thought when I came home, I thought it was a joke. I didn't believe my brother. And because that was pretty rare back then. And I wasn't sure how I felt about it because I was still, although a good athlete, I was still pretty much a novice. So my freshman year, I ended up making the JV, but I wasn't a frontline guy or anybody that was making an impact. And I was still kind of learning the system. And, fortuitously, at least for me, two freshman backs got hurt midseason about, I think maybe there were 4 games left. So the day before the game, I went down on the freshmen because they were shorthanded, and that was a lot slower than the JV, and things really took off for me. Had some had a lot of fun, and then the end of the season, like I said, the varsity had a very good team. When our season ended, they brought 4 freshmen up to the varsity, so I got brought up to the varsity at the end, and not to contribute, but it was an eye-opening. Even though I'd been on the JV, it was still eye-opening.
Now, I was curious. So, what was the demographic like at Marshall? Because Marshall has changed through the years. But when I was coaching the summer league team in the '90s, it was very diverse. You had a working class Pemmon Hills area. You had some more upscale areas in the eastern part of Vienna, like Maryfield area. It was a mixture. I think it's gone more upscale again now. What was the demographic like? I mean, why would Coach Henry leave Annandale and go to Marshall?
That I don't know. And I couldn't give you the percentages in terms of demographics. I just know, I think our enrollment was around 2,400, which is that's 600 in a class. And a lot of those communities, Schaus Village was being built, which ended up going to Marshall, Dunloring, Tyson's Green, where we were, Pemmon Hills, all those fed in. And it was, I don't know what the percentages, but it was a very good mix for athletics. We were good in most sports and had, a good coaching staff.
It's interesting because I talked to coaches. I remember when Jefferson was the new school with Wickline. I can't imagine Jefferson being a new school. Marshall, these are like the Western schools now. I mean, you always had Herndon way out there, and you had Fairfax High School out there, But it was funny how the Western schools were, Marshall and Jefferson, and every year they moved further out into the western part of the county.
Yeah, that's true. They jumped the Beltway, and you started seeing the Western corridor get developed. And Marshall shrunk dramatically, if you remember. It was on the verge of being classified as a double-A school. But when I was there, I mean, I can't remember whether it was my sophomore, junior year, but we had 40 kids come out for D-back. 40. You think you can find 4 out of that? So it was very competitive just to get a slot on that team.
Yeah.
But that was, that was the times.
So your sophomore year, did you play varsity?
I think that when I look back, I don't think that I kind of fulfilled the expectation for myself and that the coaches had after my freshman year. In fact, started out blazing. I won we did, Coach Henry, again, being ahead of his time, I think, we did a battery of fitness tests called the Top 22 test, something I adopted for my entire career. I think they'd gotten it from the Jets. And it was weightlifting, it was running, it was vertical jump 40. I think even had time jump rope in there one time, back pedal. And my sophomore year, I was number 1. And it shocked me. I was pretty much unheard of. How I did it, I don't know. But the reality is there were some better players on the varsity at the running back position. I mean, there was, and I might get my years mixed up, Albert Drow and Dinky Jones, Elvis Jones and Jay McKeever, and a bunch of guys that were better players than I was. So I had to wait my turn.
So your junior and senior year, did you eventually get that starting running back slot?
Yeah. My junior year started out pretty good. In fact, we were unscored on in the first 4 games, and I had some decent games. And I got in Coach Henry's doghouse for dropping a pitch out and maybe losing the handle on another ball. And he wasn't very forgiving, and we were pretty deep in talent. So that was kind of a hot and cold year, but well, I guess we'll revisit other sports. And then my senior year, I went in probably in the best shape I'd been. I'd really trained hard for my senior year, and unfortunately, the second game of my senior year, I took a bad knee injury, or what was called a triad: lateral collateral, medial collateral cruciates. It was like I was in a car accident. So on the operating table 8 hours. Spent 2 weeks in the hospital. Had a follow-up surgery 5 weeks after to get what they couldn't get, and ostensibly ended my senior year, which is still, but when I look back, and we'll visit this during this podcast, when I look back, it actually was, I think, fate or a godsend, because even though I didn't know it at the time, because I think there was unfinished business for me, it might have planted the coaching seed.
Yeah, I think a lot of coaches, even like myself, and I just kind of scraped around coaching. I did AAU and summer league, but it's a lot of times it's players who didn't fulfill their own playing day, their own playing destiny, and they have something to prove, and they never got away from them. So you mentioned Coach Henry had a test you learned from the Jets to kind of test your score. What other things did you learn from Coach Henry that came in handy as a head coach yourself, or even an assistant coach later on?
Well, number one, and I mentioned this, he was willing to innovate. When a lot of coaches sort of have their philosophy and their come hell or high water, that's what they're going to do. And he didn't do that. Let me click this off here. The other thing is he was very, and I wasn't at another school, so I don't have a frame of reference, but things were very structured and very organized. When we came up, the practice schedule was posted in the locker room, and we knew what we were doing, and all the assistant coaches, they had their responsibilities, and things generally ran pretty smoothly. And I don't know if that was typical or not at that time. Now, obviously, when I got into coaching and working for Bruce Patrick, he was also very organized. So it was kind of, and then I think I adopted that as a head coach.
So you played for Coach Nick Helgert, and for folks who may not remember, he was a long-time assistant at Robinson and became the head coach after Coach Henry. He was your running backs coach at Marshall. So what was it like? What was a young Nick Helgert like?
Well, first of all, he had been, when TC opened up, he had coached at one of the feeder schools, and I can't remember which one it was. and didn't get picked up on the TC staff. And Coach Henry brought him over. And here's a guy who played it short in stature, but he played at East Carolina, and he had done 2 tours in Vietnam with the Marines. So he was a tough guy, but wonderful coach to play for. And he took a shining to me, and likewise. I learned a lot from him. He was very tough and very demanding, as I said, but always felt like I had an advocate in him. And when I hurt my knee, he was the one in the spring when I was trying to get myself back in shape, came out on the track, would smoke a couple cigarettes and say, okay, now I'm ready. And would get out on the track with me and, was working on getting my leg back in shape. But a funny Coach Hilgert story is my freshman year, I said I got brought up to varsity. Well, I was also going to play basketball. And the freshman basketball coach left a spot open for me because they were already maybe 3 weeks into practice. Like I said, we went to the regional final in football. And to this day, it's a regret I have, and it affected my attitude about multi-sport athletes as a coach. I showed up for the basketball team as planned, and it quickly became apparent I was going to make the team, but I was not going to be a star, much less a frontline guy. I was going to be a guy, come off the bench, play some defense, maybe get a rebound if you can. And my ego got in the way, I think, now looking back on it. And I wanted to get a letter. And I figured I'd had a background in track and field, as I mentioned. I could do what they called winter track back then, not indoor track, because there was no indoor to it. That I could maybe earn a letter. And I stopped playing basketball, and I regretted it. Every, game when I would go up and sit in the stands all the way to my senior year, and my friends were down there. I was friends with a lot of basketball players. I wished I was down there, sitting on the bench probably. But, that impacted my ability to, when I became a coach and players would tell me, I think I'm going to give up baseball. I'm going to give up this. I would always say, I want you to think about some things. And can you sleep on a little bit before you do that? But the funny Coach Hilgert story is our PE classes had gone into a wrestling unit because they were, girls and boys were separated. And I won my weight class within my PE class. And then they said, as part of your grade, you had to come after school for intramurals. And I ended up wrestling another football player. Incidentally, a guy had also gotten brought up to the varsity. He beat me. But Coach Hilgert at the end handed me wrestling singlet and a padlock and said, we'll see you tomorrow. And I said, but Coach Hilgert, because he was the head wrestling coach, I play basketball. And he goes, no, you don't. Maybe he knew something. Maybe he'd seen me play. And so I had to turn him down, which was a hard thing to do. But that's a side Coach Hilgert story.
He never helped Epperly at Robinson, did he? Because I didn't know he coached. I didn't know he coached wrestling.
He did. He was a head wrestling coach in Marshall, and I think kind of gets to what you were talking about. When he took over for Coach Henry as the head football coach, I don't think there was time. Plus, Coach Epperly, he had that room locked down.
Yeah, he did. I have a funny. I don't know if it's a funny Hilgert story, but I lived in Lake Braddock, so he lived 2 streets down from me. So I knew Coach Hilgert pretty well. I knew his son, Brian, I believe his name is. Great guy as well.
Yeah, Brian's the oldest. Right?
Yeah, and so I was a really, really good little league football player because, as you said, in a weight for age type thing, it does favor the little guys. So I had a pretty big reputation as a running back, but I didn't grow when I got into high school. I was very small. And I think Coach Henry especially was afraid I was going to get hurt. So I was playing freshman, as a freshman, then JV as a sophomore, but they wouldn't give me the ball a lot. And so Hilgert was the JV coach when I was playing. So I remember one game, he put me in the game with like 3 minutes to go in the game. It was 0-0. He said, Julian, go in there and win the game for me. And so I said, okay, coach. I went in there and I had a couple good plays. But I think I picked up a couple blitzes because I was a really good blocker. I had been taught really well at a young age. I played for a team called the Braddock Road Sharks. We were an amazing little league football team. So in the locker room after the game, he's almost in tears and said, look, if all you guys had half the heart that Julian Brown has. And so I was sitting there. I didn't even know what he was talking about. I went in the game. He didn't play me very much. When he finally got in, I wasn't able to score. And I did block well, but that was something I was supposed to do. So it was really funny because I didn't know, really how small I was. And I probably shouldn't have been on the field. But it was funny. It meant so much to him, and he was almost in tears talking about me in front of the whole team. And I just had no idea what was going on. I had no idea what was. And my friends were like, "Julian, what is he talking about?" And I'm like, "I don't know." So
he was,
anyway,
before the term
yeah,
was popular, he was a player's coach.
yeah,
There's no question about it. And
yeah.
I jumped at the chance when I got to coach with him later on, and that was a lot of fun and very, very fulfilling.
Was he a very different guy by the time you coached with him later on, or was he the same type of coach that you remember?
No, he mellowed quite a bit as a
Mhm.
position coach. As I'd said earlier, you got worried when he turned that hat around and was going to demonstrate something. He was still full of a lot of energy. When I came over to Robinson, he was, and he even said this when he was kind of courting me to come over there, that he was at the end of his career. And, you know, um, the game had, in terms of the time demands and the expectations had had increased significantly. And what Coach Hilgert liked about the game was the relationships, and he didn't want to be there 5 days a week in that weight room and doing all those things. And I get that. His son Brian was playing down at Ferrum, and his mom, who was in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, where he grew up, was sick. And you know, I don't. I was happy to come on board and help, quite frankly, so he could continue to coach.
Yeah. So, well, let's go back to Marshall. And I know that you ended up being a good track and field athlete. So, how did that come about, and what did you excel in?
Well, like I said, in the Midwest, the elementary schools had track teams, and I don't think I was great at any one thing. I could run and jump a little bit, and was pretty coordinated. I wish somebody, when I was in high school, had suggested the decathlon. I didn't even know what that was. Not that I'd have been Rob Musio by any stretch of the imagination. So, I did have a background in that, and then. When I got involved coaching, it's totally different than football because track and field more and more demanding. Track fell at the side, but we had at Mount Vernon, where I started out, a lot of athletes crossed over in the spring, and we were very good in track.
Okay, so you finished Marshall now. So where'd you go next? Where'd you go to college?
Well, I still had it in my system that I was going to play football regardless of what the doctors were saying. And Ferrum, which was a junior college then, soon after became a Division III school, had won the national championship, I think it's 75 maybe, or thereabouts. And that's where you went to try to further your football career if, things hadn't worked out in high school. And I'd been called by some of the service academies because my dad was military, but I didn't like the whole moving around thing very much. So I went to Ferrum with the intent to see if I could resurrect my career. I was not ready to really euphemism. Long story short, I hurt my knee again, knocked it out of joint, and didn't want to lose the academic semester. So they braced it up in a Velcro thing. I finished the school year and came home for the third surgery on my knee. So it was a bit of a struggle. And that's when they brought up the Air Force Academy doctor from Colorado to Bethesda Naval Hospital. And he told me at the end, he says, not a lot left in there. You got to stop with the football thing or you're really going to screw it up. And so again, the coaching seed hadn't really started to sprout in my mind. I was still kind of hanging on to the be a player thing. And so I decided to transfer to Virginia Tech, which I think I wasn't telling anybody, but in the back of my mind, I was like, if this knee's feeling better, I'll switch positions because I lost a lot of my mobility by that time. But I was not ready to go in the fall. I was still going out to Bethesda 3 days a week for rehab. And frankly, I still wasn't really, I had a lot of fun and I kind of took to it, but I still wasn't thinking about coaching as a career yet.
So okay, but you're still at Tech. You're finishing up in Tech. So did you go back or?
Did I go back to Tech?
Yeah, did you go back to Tech or did you stay in a DC
Yeah,
area?
what I did, I took a year off while I was getting rehabbed. I took some classes just to stay caught up, and
Mhm.
I had applied for transfer. I got accepted, and then I deferred my admission a full year so I could get my knees squared away. And I went there. I went, and then a friend of mine, she had gone to school. She'd been a state gymnastics champion and went to college on a swimming and diving scholarship. And she said to me, you know, you'd be a great coach. It's just, have you thought about that? And I go, do they pay you to do that? It was like a hobby. Because they didn't pay me when I coached at Marshall. Uh, and she said, you know, you're going to work a long time. Don't you want to do something you're going to enjoy getting up in the morning to do? And I said, oh, absolutely. So I went in, made an appointment, talked to my faculty advisor, and he was like, you got 3 years into business administration and you want to switch to an education degree? And I said, yep. So I then loaded up as many hours as I get because by now I wanted to get out. I wanted to start working. And again, third time, fate, God intervened. I applied to student teach in Fairfax County because I thought that'd be my best chance to get hired. So they gave, you could put down on the form three schools. I put Marshall, Madison, Oakton, all Vienna schools because I'm going to stay at home. And I figured somebody might remember me. I might have a chance to get hired. I get my assignment back as Mount Vernon. I go,
Mm.
where is it? I didn't even, I knew that George and Martha's house was out there, but I was like, that's where I'm student teaching. That there, that was the absolute best time to be at Mount Vernon. Tom Heyer, the principal, athletic background, Bruce Patrick, fairly young, energetic coach, great student body, great collection of athletes. Couldn't have been a better place for me to start.
So you went to Mount Vernon and you're also teaching in the building as well. What were you teaching?
Physical education and health.
Okay,
I had
okay.
student taught in the spring, and I helped
Mhm.
in the weight room, which is where I
Okay.
think I caught Bruce Patrick's eye. And
Mhm.
and I don't know how it happened, but they had an opening and brought me right in on the varsity football staff and put me on defense. And my background was in offense, but that was such a smart thing to do because I think I would have been cocky had I been on offense that I know what to do. Defense, I had to study up, get myself up to speed, and I got hired as well in a teaching position. And then also, as I said, coach track.
So what did you so you said Coach Patrick is very detail oriented, very structured. Um,
Yes.
so you got there on the heels of a regional championship football team and a state championship basketball team. How did you guys do as an assistant for Coach Patrick? And what are some of the other things you learned from him?
Well, we had my first year, which was '81. We didn't have a great year, but we were building the foundation. And Brewster, which was '82, we won the region, and then lost to GW Danville, who was the eventual state champion. My third year, which was '83, we won the Virginia State Championship, still the only state championship that Mount Vernon has won in football. So things got going very quickly. We had a great, like I said, it was a confluence of a lot of things came together. Supportive administration, good coaching staff, community that was behind us, and players that were totally devoted and committed to doing what needed to be done.
And you stayed on defense the whole time?
No, I primarily, but I think 2 seasons I coached the offensive backs, but mostly during those championship years, I was on defense.
So there was a guy at Mount Vernon that I went to UVA with. His name was either Vince or Vance, and he played defense. And so I met him. I was an ROTC at UVA. I met him like the first week I was in school, and we were telling a story. I said, "Yeah, I went to Robinson." He said, "Yeah, I'm the guy that Slick Bailey hurdled." I mean, what are you talking about? Well, there was a famous game, like I think it was 81, 1980. Slick Bailey, for folks that don't know, was one of the most electric running backs ever. I mean, he would gain 40 yards on a play, then lose 20 the next play. You never know what's going to happen, but you could never take your eyes off him. I mean, it was a thrill a minute. And so there was a game. Mount Vernon came to Robinson. It was a tough matchup. I think it was the first game of the year, and Slick Bailey was rolling, and I think Vince tried to tackle him. Slick went right over him, and I'm not sure if that was legal at the time, but I don't think there was a flag called, and he scored a touchdown. Do you remember Vince? I think his name was, and you remember that play at all?
I remember Slick Bailey had a really big game. I do remember that. I don't remember that specific player, the player, but yeah, I remember Bailey had 160 yards, something, maybe more. I don't know. I remember he was hard to get a hold of.
Yeah. So, what was it like? Tell us a little bit, because I want to get to your Robinson days. I know you'll have a lot more to say about those players, but what was it like coaching with on the staff with John Rimiszewski, All-American linebacker? Also, I think he played at Duke. Frankie Smith,
Yeah.
Paul Fisher. You had some great football players and great athletes on that team.
Yeah, you don't win a championship without great players and committed players. And, I think I want to say, and I could be wrong in this, but I think on that 83 defense that won the state championship, I think 9 of the guys went on and played college football.
Wow.
And I'm within one on that. And, you mentioned a lot of them. Sean Scott, who was an all-Met nose guard, was a 4-year start at UVA. John Ramiszewski, who was a defensive player of the year, was the team captain at Duke. Bill Brady was an all-region player, signed with App State. We had defensive end who went to Penn State. We had Paul Fisher was in the secondary. Mike Gant was in the secondary, who went to the Air Force Academy. Frank Smith at quarterback. I mean, we had a lot of really good players.
How did you get so many good players in one? It seems unbelievable to have so much talent on one team.
Yeah, it was a really good time to be at Mount Vernon, and football, guys wanted to be a part of football because, there was a lot of school spirit at Mount Vernon, and Friday nights was the place to be, and guys wanted to be a part of that because a lot of those guys had come from other sports. Paul Fisher was a basketball player. Frank Smith was a basketball player. You had a lot of multi-sport guys who also played football.
And so did you become the head track and field coach at Mount Vernon while you were there?
I did pretty quickly. They handed me the indoor program. Our offensive coordinator, Ken Godrow, was the head track coach. Well, he wanted to break between football and spring track, so he handed me the keys to the indoor program within maybe my second year. So I got involved with that right away, and I was still doing the weight room as well.
So, and did you become the outdoor coach as well, or did you stuck to indoor?
Okay. I did.
And
I eventually took over both the men's and the women's program in the spring. So I was pretty busy, but it was a lot. It gave me a change up. A lot of those guys crossed over. John Ramiszewski was a state champion in the shot and discus, and Zach Scott, who also was now track coach at VMI. Ed Cunningham went on the NFL through the shot and discus, and we had a lot of good athletes. We were typically in the top 10 finishing in the state track meet. I don't think we ever won the whole thing, but we were in the mix normally.
What made Ed Cunningham so special that he made it all the way to the NFL?
Number one, he was not a guy that, as a freshman, I don't think a lot of people would have predicted his success. He thought of himself as a basketball player. He'll tell you that. And everybody went, yeah, you're a pretty good basketball player, but you're going to be a heck of a football player. He was very smart. He had great work ethic, and he just kept getting better and better and better. And he bought into the weight program and got very strong. And his senior year, he was a who's who that was offering him scholarships. I mean, I remember him sitting across from Lou Holtz, and Lou Holtz saying, you come here, you win a national championship. And ironically, the track and field programs what got him out to Washington, where he went, and he was a team captain. They won, they were co-national champs with Georgia Tech, I believe, in '91. But he had gone out there for nationals in the AAU in the javelin, and he liked the campus, liked the school, and that's where he went. But he could have gone just about anywhere, because here was a guy who was 260 and could run 4.9 in the 40.
Wow.
Yeah. So
did he end up playing?
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did he end up playing varsity basketball? I don't remember him playing basketball.
He did not. He ended up, and I don't know whether it was after his freshman year or sophomore year, just focusing on football and track and field, with football being his, his priority. Um, but he was a tremendous offensive lineman.
Yeah. Okay, so you're at Mount Vernon. You had great success in track and field as head coach. You had great success as an assistant, offense and defense. You're building a great resume and a great skill set with which to be a head coach. So where did you go next?
Well, first of all, interesting enough, I had a couple inquiries about coaching college football. I got contacted by 2 ACC schools, one being NC State, who was probably the most interested. And I was kind of torn. Is this an opportunity I should look at? And they want answers pretty quick when they come in. They don't mess around. And so, I was wrestling with what to do. And I talked to Coach Patrick about it. And back then, you got to remember, you came in typically as a GA, and you were more or less an indentured servant. You went into a room because it's, using videotape, and you cut up film. And during a game, you're in the third row in the press box charting, 2nd and 7. So it was pretty thankless, but it was a way to get in the door. And money wasn't what it is now, where assistants are making 500,000 and coordinators $1 million. Or 2 million in the case of Clemson. And then Coach Patrick kind of helped me out, and I'm glad for his advice. He said, number one, he said, you want to run your own program. You want to be a head coach, right? And I said, yes. And he said, well, it's going to happen quicker at the high school level. So you're already kind of fast tracked for it. And two, he said, the high school level, you can have your hand in some, you can be the strength coach and a football coach, and you can call plays, and you can be a position coach if you want to. And you can even coach another sport if you want to. In college, that's what you're going to do. And so I started thinking about that, and I said, you know what? I don't think I've accomplished what I want to at the high school level. Maybe I'll revisit this. So I thanked him and turned him down. And then what happened is Coach Patrick got an opportunity to go to be the county AD. So we all were kind of breaking up, and I knew that there was a chance that Mount Vernon was going to offer me the head job, but I kind of saw that with the way the county was growing, inside the Beltway, the schools were shrinking. Outside the Beltway, like you touched on, were growing. The Lake Braddocks and the Robinsons and the schools out on the Western corridor. And I said, long term, that's the place to be. Well, Chantilly opened up, and I applied. George Keim, everybody who recently passed away, just a wonderful man. You won't find anybody who'll say a bad thing about George Keim. He hired me. Unfortunately, didn't tell me he was going to retire. But so that's where I moved from Mount Vernon.
And you became a head coach at Chantilly or assistant coach?
I did. Yeah, I did. Yeah, that was Doug Yule's senior year.
Okay, so you're a head coach right away. So you were
right
hired
away.
as the head coach. Okay.
I was.
Yeah.
Came in as head coach.
One thing that Coach Yule said about you, I asked him, I don't know if you heard the podcast, but I asked him, what did you learn from Coach Bendorf? He said, things were timed. The things you did in practice were competitive. He knew how to make the different aspects of a practice competitive. That's what he learned, and he uses those to this day.
Yeah, I think I brought the thing you asked me about Bruce Patrick. He was very structured, and I'm organized by nature, I think, so it kind of lent itself to that. And I brought as much of that model with me as I could, including the strength and conditioning program. And I didn't use the same offense, but I kind of put my own stamp there. But a lot of those things that I'd learned at Mount Vernon, I did bring over there, and it was a really good time to be there. Chantilly was a newer community, even though the school had been open a while. Energetic, enthusiastic. The players were very dedicated, hardworking. Stepped right up to the expectations. And his senior year, we were 2 touchdowns from 9-1. So we came out of the blocks pretty well. And then Centerville opened up. And, back then, they want to fill those buildings quickly. They didn't give students a choice other than the rising seniors. They weren't going to go, you're going to go here for 3 years and then graduate from somewhere else. They let them stay. But our classes, and I don't know what the enrollment was, let's say 500. All of a sudden, those classes became 250. So it became tougher in football. I think we were playing that next year, maybe 17 sophomores, and 4 or 5 of them both ways. So we were pretty challenged, but the players had such a wonderful attitude and work ethic about them. They're there giving it their best every single day. And it was good for me as a coach to grow, because I'd only known success both as a player at Marshall. I think we only lost 5 or 6 regular season games my 4 years there. Mount Vernon, we've already talked about. So to go through some trials and tribulations, it's not fun, but it makes you a better coach. And to this day, I'm just so impressed with the attitude of those players. But, again, I think God or fate intervened again, because number one, like I said, George Kime retired, and there was a philosophical conflict with the next guy, and out the door I went. But Nick Hilgert had lost his offensive coordinator. Maynard Hines went to Herndon, and he'd been calling me about, come over here and help. You can be the offensive coordinator. And I wasn't sure. I was kind of saying, you know what, maybe I'm going to consider the college football thing again. I wasn't sure, so I didn't give him an answer. Then he called me up and offered me the defensive coordinator's job. And we had a lot of lunches together over it. But in the end, it got me over to Robinson, which turned out to be a godsend. So it's just funny how things worked out and fell in place for me.
That was around like 92, 91, 92.
Yeah, 92.
Okay.
It was 92. Yep.
Okay. So you had 3 or 4 years with Hilgert, and how did those teams do in those years?
Yeah. Well, first I do want to mention, I thought of this when you were interviewing Doug at Chantilly. Doug Ewell has had a successful coaching career, won a state championship in basketball. Steve Francis, who was a co-captain with Doug, coached every year with me at Robinson, helped us go to 3 state championships and win 2. Chris Beatty, who was the quarterback that followed Doug, coaches in the NFL for the Chargers. So a lot of guys from there that, in the short time I was there, went into coaching. Kind of a cool thing. Chris Haddock, who was before my time, is also a Chantilly grad. And there's more guys too. But anyway, to answer your question, when I got to Robinson, my first year, which was 92, we won the region. We beat Annandale, I think 21-0. And then we got beaten a heck of a game by Pulaski, 12-10 on a last-minute field goal by, what was his name? Shane Graham was a longtime NFL kicker, who was, I think, a freshman then. Beat us last 10 seconds or something like that. So we came out of the blocks there. Well, I went out of the blocks because Robinson was already doing pretty well. But I was able to mesh right in, running the defense, and had Dave Van Dyke, who was an early commit to Penn State, and Mike Hertz, who was the All-Met Defensive Player of the Year. So it's not like the cupboard was bare.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to talk to Charlie Thompson a lot while he was there? He's a guy I worked for. I coached his summer league teams in, I guess, '89, his first year there. Did you get a chance to talk to him? And he's an interesting guy. He's a proven winner, and he's also he's a personality. He's a character.
Yeah, no, it did. And in fact, he was in the PE department, so we worked together. And I had worked with Don McCool at Mount Vernon and watching him coach, I was one of the few guys he'd led in the gym. And I learned a lot from him and Charlie as well. And it was, the intensity that he could get his teams to play at was pretty impressive. Great. Both great coaches.
Great. Oh yeah, amazing coaches. And those guys had a lifelong rivalry. So it's definitely the Hatfields and McCoys. So
it was.
So anyway, soon, and you can, if you have any other players or teams you want to talk about before we get to your head stint, you can. But pretty soon, Coach Hilgert is going to step down as head coach, and you're going to get your chance. Did you know that you were being groomed, and you had a good chance to get the job when he retired?
Yeah, I was trying to take as much off of his plate as I could, because as I said, at that point where he was, his mom was sick. He was trying to watch his son who was playing college football. And I was happy to do that. Actually, I had done it before, and so I knew, it's not like he had said I'm retiring on this date, but I figured that, well, there was no guarantee, but I figured I'd be considered for the job.
Yeah. And so you got the job. Must have been a
Mhm.
very exciting experience. And then did you did you try to continue on what you were doing, because you probably had a very big input into what Coach Hogan was doing in his last few years. So when you got the head job, did you change things, and change the offense and defense, or did you kept going with the same momentum that you had?
Did a wholesale change on the offense. The offense had been a pro eye. Chris Warren, Slick Bailey, Mark Smith, Toby Harris, all those guys, and that Robinson had great success with that. It was a rollout passing game, but as a former defensive coordinator, what I did is I said the hardest things to stop were the misdirection stuff. When I went back, when we were at Mount Vernon, we got beat by a Marshall team coached by Neil Callahan and my brother, who was with Lonnie Goldberg and those guys, uh, running a version of the wing T, and we had good defense. We struggled to stop them. And then West Potomac, when I was at Chantilly, they won 2 state championships with Danny Meyer running the wing T. And I said, that's the hardest thing to defend at that time. And I said, but there were parts of it I didn't like, in that the formations were so compressed that I felt you got too many people in the box. And I didn't like that it didn't lend itself easily to a passing game, which, I believed early on that you don't win a championship without balance. You have to be able to run and throw and kick. And so I needed to figure out a way to marry up all those things to get the benefits of the misdirection and the down blocking and the pulling, uh, with the ability to get a lot of people out in routes through the play action game. And so I kind of, in writing the playbook, pretty much grab bagged a lot of things together. Defensively, because I've been the defense coordinator, we were more similar there than we had traditionally been. And I retained, Barry Grodnick, who coached defense with me, elevated him to
Okay.
defensive coordinator. So, there wasn't a lot of change on defense, but offense, it was everything from the huddle on down we changed.
Now, you may have mentioned this. Did you become the offensive coordinator as well, or did you hire somebody and you just happened to look and you happened to pay more attention to the offense?
I briefly tried to convince my brother to come over,
Hmm.
um, but that he had other visions of being the head coach himself, which he did become head coach. So what I figured the best thing was to make Barry Grodnick the defensive coordinator. He knew what I wanted. We'd coach together, and I took over the offense. So I did
Okay. So
I
you
did call plays. Yeah, I was, I guess, offensive coordinator and head coach, I guess.
now when you coach high school football, can you gain inspiration for some of the things colleges and pros do, or the scale is so different in terms of size and speed and the time that you can really put these kids, so you can't be as complicated. Do like in basketball, high school coaches gain a lot of inspiration from what they see on TV or in film from college, especially. Does it work like that in football, or is the game too different and it's hard to do that in football?
No, it's actually, a lot of people don't know this. The innovations in football come at the high school level. Why? There's 16,000 high school football teams. That's a lot of coaches working to figure out something new, something unique, something different, particularly when guys take over struggling programs or guys who are in leagues where they might be outmatched. So you got a lot of people in the lab, a lot of people. So when you look at the innovations of football, the midline option, a lot of the empty stuff, a lot of the influence blocking, a lot of those things, some of the RPOs and run and shoot stuffs, there might be some debate on that it came from the college level, but oftentimes it's colleges looking at high school film, recruiting players,
Hmm.
going, well, that's kind of interesting. And pro coaches are, the pro game is pretty generic. And the reason is there's a lot at risk. And if you are going to make a gamble and change and doesn't work, you're out. So the innovations come at the high school level because there's much less risk. Colleges pick it
Right.
up and so on. So it's kind of different. When most college teams for years have been in the gun until fairly recently. Pro quarterbacks were under center. So the innovations are at the high school level.
Okay. So
And
you
a
would
lot
look
of
for
people
other
don't know that. Pardon?
Right. So you would look to other high school coaches for inspiration. You're not looking at the colleges or pros because they're getting stuff from the high school.
Yeah, I think all coaches plagiarize. That's absolutely true. In fact, although I have to tell you, I'd watch bowl games with a legal pad of paper because occasionally you do see stuff. But the biggest, advice, the best advice I can give a new high school coach is there's a lot of different ways to succeed. And so do what fits your personality, what you know best, and what you're comfortable with. So you can go home and look in the mirror and go, that's me. My football team is a reflection of me. And I think given the players we have, this gives us the best chance to win. And because football comes down to execution. My thing is, don't be one dimensional. If you're going to throw the ball, understand that somebody's going to come along, probably when you get in the playoffs, and going to match up with your 5 wide when you're empty, and they're going to bring 6. And now you only have 5 blockers. You're in trouble unless that quarterback's Michael Niebrick and can run. Okay? If you just run the ball, you're eventually going to get about what seems like 20 guys in the box, and now you're not going to be able to run it anymore. You better have the ability to throw. You better have the ability, if you got to get down the field quick, to do that before the end of the game. So whatever you do, have the versatility to be able to have. There's nothing worse than being on the sideline and running out of options. No pun intended. That because then you go, what do I do? And that happened early in my career. We'd come off our first year. We'd won the state championship, which was '97, which we were 14-0, and we had a pretty good team about 2 or 3 years later, undefeated, regular season, and we played Centerville, who also had a very good team. That was the 2000 team, I think, and they beat us 16-13. And I remember feeling a little. Mike Skinner had done a very good job with his defensive game plan, and I remember feeling kind of handcuffed. And so from that point on, I completely expanded our playbook. And of course, the next year we won the state championship again, which was in '01, beating Centerville in the regional final. So it was a hard lesson to learn, but an important one to learn.
Yeah. So when you expand your playbook, you have less time with each play. So it's almost like when you expand your playbook, though, you may do certain things not quite as well because you have to have a lot of breadth in the things that you know. So doesn't it become kind of hard to coach a team in that way?
Yeah, you got several challenges. If you have too big a playbook, execution's going to suffer because you're not going to have the ability to practice it all. It's like people saying, you know what, I want to have an option component, I want to have a run and shoot component, and I want to have a power I component. That's why you see spread teams struggle when they get down tight near the goal line because they can't convert to the power game. And option teams who have to get down the field quick and have to go to the gun struggle. So there's a delicate balance on you want to have enough variety in your playbook so you have something to pull when you need it, but not so much variety you can't get it, your execution suffers. So what we did is I had a pretty large playbook. I don't know how many plays we had, but given our personnel, if you had a mobile quarterback, then you were going to be able to run some of your keeps and your options and your boots. If you had a drop back guy, that was going to change. When we had John Kinzer, who was a very good tight end, who went to Virginia Tech, featured him more in the passing game because he needed to get the ball in his hands. So I think what you do is you take that playbook and say, okay, we got 100 pages in our playbook or whatever. This season, we're going to use 65 of those pages. And that way it's there for you. And then the next year, maybe you dust those pages off. And then the other thing is important to add wrinkles every week because now people are looking at your film and they're going to defend what they've seen. I always kind of thought it was important to, have a few things that they hadn't seen. And it kept it interesting for the players because what are we putting in new this week? Just don't get too crazy with it.
Well, the whole thing seems like an amazing achievement. You take this team over I mean, you've been a head coach before, but you take this team over, you change the offense. It's not even a wing T. You add wrinkles to what you want to do. And then so you have to make these big selections, these big decisions you have to make, and you have no guarantee they're all going to work. It all comes together, you go undefeated, and you win the state championship. It just seems so unlikely in the first year.
Should have retired because there was only one way to go. Yeah, I'm done. Retired.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's a lot to do in the first year, and you do it all, and you win the state championship. I mean, how did you pull that off?
First of all, I think the makings were there, and it was a matter of putting it together. Marcus Howard, who was Matt, you probably remember Matt Howard. He was coming back. He'd had a very good junior season. Alex Marco Giannakis was our middle linebacker, ended up going to Virginia Tech. We had a number of players back from a 96 team, which had gone to the regional final and got thumped pretty good by Chantilly. But, we had the nucleus back. So I think that's number one. And number two, the weight program was getting better and better every year. We were getting stronger and stronger and stronger and faster. And, all those, that 97 team, which won the state championship, the most points it gave up in a game was 12. So nobody even got to 14. And that's what we were pulling the starters out pretty early because we had such a good team. I think 6 of the front 7 made all region, all 4 D linemen. Eugene Mitchell was an all-state player, all region both ways.
I coached him basketball. He just
I played 4 years of
kid.
basketball. Oh yeah, 17 sacks his senior year and didn't drop 31 catches. Jim Turnmeyer was a defensive lineman. Mike Van Dyke I'm sure you remember the Van Dyke family. Josh was probably around a little bit after you maybe. So, the makings were there, and it just, fortunately, it all came together.
That's amazing. That must have been amazing. I love the picture that I posted on the group. It's a beautiful photo of a beautiful team. So, but you go back again in 3 years, and you get to the final once more. Is that correct?
Yeah. In fact, the freshmen that we had brought up on the 97 team got a chance to win another ring their senior year. The 2000 team, which was an undefeated regular season team, had beaten Centerville, I think, in the regular season, and then lost to them in the regional final. And I was worried because that was a very senior-laden team, 40-something seniors. And I thought, we blew it. But we came back and won it the next year. So we were, and then in the year after that, we went to the regional final the following year. And my brother beat us, Oakton beat us, and then they went to the state final and got beat by Hilton. And then 03 went to the regional final again. We were undefeated and got beat by Westfield, and then went to the state final the next year, which was 04. So we had a pretty good run, and it continued after that.
So we haven't talked too much about your brother yet. So what kind of coach was he? Was it tough to coach against your own brother? And how different are you guys as coaches?
We are alike and we're different. And, frankly, some of the traits that he has, I wish that I had. And in terms of his strengths, he's got a photographic, memory. He can sit scouting, and a lot of guys will get, okay, I got the backfield action, or I got the blocking scheme, or I got the routes. He gets it all just by looking at it. And he can remember personnel groupings and down and distance tendencies. And so, from that sense, he's hard to coach against. I think the standing joke on my team was when you'd play Oakton, when he was coaching Oakton, and later South County, and our players would break the huddle, and if they didn't remember the play, they just listened to my brother on the opposing sideline. He was yelling it. So, that's how well versed he was. But the other thing is he is much better at taking things in stride. I'm a life and death guy. When we lose, it's death, and the highs are high and the lows are lows. He stays much more even keel. And I think it's what's allowed him to coach 40 plus years.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No.
Okay. Did you call your own plays as an offense coordinator / head coach, or in what latitude did you give your quarterback to audible at the line?
I did call our own plays, but we had some of the things I wanted the quarterback to call because certain plays worked better with certain defensive alignments. So what we could do, and we did this a fair amount, I would call the formation and then the play on me. So let's just say, for example, I could go twins right, open, trap on me. And what the quarterback could then do is he could look at the alignment, and he'd been already schooled on which way we want to run that trap based on some alignment rules. So they had some latitude there. Early on, I gave the quarterbacks even some more latitude where if they saw blitz, where they could check to a drop back screen and things like that. But then I felt I was probably putting too much on their plate and putting too much of an expectation on them. So it's a balance.
One thing that you're also known for is you actually really care about the kicking game. Some coaches, that's kind of an afterthought, and they kind of live and die with whatever guy they can find. How did you find your kickers and punters? Did you go to the soccer team and get guys, or what was your and also the holder for the extra point? What was your strategy in finding that personnel?
Well, first of all, sorry about that. We were blessed at everywhere I was to have good kickers. From Sean Conway at Mount Vernon and John Gould to Joey Hillbull to Phil Brady, who's coaching at Robinson now, who punted at West Virginia, and Hillbull punted at Notre Dame. And I don't take credit for it, trust me. In fact, there's something I probably would do differently if I got back into coaching, and that's that at Mount Vernon, Bruce Patrick had a rule, and I understood the rationale behind it was you couldn't just be a kicker punter. You had to play another position as well. And the purpose of it was team unity. Punters and kickers could sometimes be separate on their own field doing their own thing. And he wanted, even if it wasn't your expertise, go be a wide receiver or a D-back or whatever. And I kind of adopted that. And I think later as soccer became more popular and looking at some of the kickers some of the other schools had, Westfield, for example, who were just kicking specialists, I think that would have been a better route to go, to let people and if I were to do it again, I think I would look at that. But to answer your question, we put a lot of emphasis on the kicking game. In fact, in the summer, we did 3-a-days. We did a morning practice like people did, and a late afternoon practice, but we did a morning practice that was strictly kicking game. It was all we did. Some of the younger guys did some team time, and it wasn't in full gear. And so the players understood that if we're devoting a full practice just to our kicking game, it must be important. And then we did the Beamer thing. We looked real hard at our personnel. A lot of people were, that was their chance to get people on the field. We put our best players on our special teams. So I think that's a big reason why we were solid with special teams. Plus, it's a third of the game.
Yeah. Well, you had such great success really quickly. I can't think of a coach offhand that won as quickly as you did. And so you were rewarded pretty quickly. Also, you got a chance to coach a national all-star game. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, back U.S. Army All-America game, which was the only the only national high school all-star game at the time in the early 2000s to late 2000s until Under Armour jumped into the deal. And I was contacted in 2005 and invited to coach. And I went down to San Antonio, Texas, spent a week down there, and coached in the Alamo Dome in a game that turned out to have a heck of a collection of players.
Oh, that's awesome. So, okay, so I think you retired from coaching in 2010, I believe. Is that, or 2012? Is that correct?
Yeah, before the 2011 season. But before we kind of move on, I started thinking about some of the players in that U.S. Army All-America game.
Oh,
Here's some of the
sure.
players: Brian Cushing, Richard Mendenhall, Anthony Moeki, Eugene Monroe, Alex Boone, Michael Orr, blindside, Kenny Phillips, Greg Paulus, who was a Duke point guard and then played quarterback at Syracuse, Deshaun Jackson, who was a Eagle or a Giant or Eagle and a Redskin, Jamal Charles, Ray Malaluga, DeMarcus Granger, Jonathan Stewart, Ndamukong Suh, Mark Sanchez, on and on. That thing, I mean, there was as much talent on one field as you'll see. But the downside of it was, I'll quickly tell you a funny Brian Cushing story, who ended up being, started as a freshman at USC and they played in the national championship. 3 years later, he's the NFL Rookie of the Year. But second practice, I was coaching the defense. And I told Cushing, I said, okay, we were required to play a 4-3. So you're going to be an outside linebacker. When the ball goes away, term we used at Robinson was post, meaning sit in case there's counter, reverse, waggle. You're not going to make the play chasing. He didn't respond to me when I said you post. And I said, Brian, do you understand? He goes, Coach, I go to the ball. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a fun week. And I said, well, no, this week you don't. You're going to sit. Ball comes to you. Yeah. So all week he sits. As soon as he's getting the game, he chases and makes a bunch of plays from the backside. So they're great coaching. So,
did he get burned?
Sorry,
Did he get burned
I
on
thought of that when you asked me about the All-Star game.
But did he get burned on a reverse or a waggle? Did he ever?
I don't think they did. He was fast enough. He probably could have redirected and made the play. I don't remember getting beat on that. But you asked me something. What did you ask me after that?
No, I was going to say, when you coach an All-Star game, do they give you plays they want you to run, or do you implement your own system because you don't have a lot of time to be fancy? So, what do you do? What do you do in an All-Star game as a football coach?
They want them to be. They don't want them to be 10-7 games. The game organizers don't want them to. So they handcuff the defenses and tell you what you got to play. We had to play man coverage, except on 3rd and down. It didn't allow you to stunt much, except in some short yardage situations. But offensively, you could run what you want. And because it's hard in a week to put everything together, even with great players. But it's not. I'll tell you, All-Star games are a mixed bag, because for these players who were highly recruited players who already knew most of them knew they were going to college. They were done with their high school. College was next. We were kind of in between. For them, it was a fun week. For the coaches, we wanted to win. And they did too, but I'm not sure how hard they wanted to work.
Yeah.
But it's fun.
Yeah. So anyway, let's get to. So I read somewhere online where one day you all of a sudden found out that you could retire with almost full benefits, and it kind of I don't think you were even aware it was coming. All of a sudden, you're able to do this. So you're working for a lot less money all of a sudden. So explain that process a little bit, and also I wanted you to talk a little bit about. Do you think there's ways they can change the incentives? And maybe we touched on earlier about guys just being paid coaches. Is there a way we can change incentives so great football and basketball coaches I've talked to, they all retired. Many have retired 20 years earlier than they really had to retire. They probably would have, coach, if there was a little more incentive to keep going.
No, you make a great point, Julian. I think it's something that is now finally starting to get discussed, because a lot of the DSAs are going, I've got turnover and I can't find replacement coaches. The talent pool is drying up as these guys leave. We can't always replace them. So a lot of those things are valid points. I think it's different for everybody. Here my brother's still coaching, so he's maybe an exception, but a lot of the guys, my own case, I can only speak for myself. I was still really enjoying it and passionate. My last 2 years, we were 10-2 and 9-3. So and we were undefeated on the JV my last year. So things were still going well. It had nothing, everything was hitting on all cylinders. But a couple things. Number one, and you asked about this before, every year it seemed like we were putting more and more time in it. And I wasn't all in on coaching. I wasn't going to cheat my players and the school and the community by going on vacations and taking time off. I was going to work every day. And I wasn't doing a whole lot else, and I figured when people kept telling me, you're getting on 30 years in, you need to at least sit down with HR. The retirement thing's a pretty good deal. And I was like, well, I'm not really ready to do that. And they said, well, it doesn't cost you anything to make the appointment. So I did. And I got thinking about, there's a lot of things that I want to do that I've put on the back burner. And there's also a lot to be said for leaving at the top of your game. And Bruce Patrick, something he'd always told me, leave it better than you found it. And I think we did that.
Yeah. So later on, you got into you and your brother had a TV show, I believe, or was it a radio podcast? Tell us a little bit about that. The first time I met you, I met you at a Hall of Fame committee dinner, but you spoke at my sister's. My sister got named into the Hall of Fame at Robinson once, and then her team came in the next year. So I was able to hear you spin stories, and you've got wonderful stories about your teams and stuff. You've got a great recall delivery too. So is that how you just love talking about? Is that how you got into the media world?
No,
did you lose me?
Yeah, I did, but I think I got the question. No, it was in the right after I took over at Robinson, we got contacted, my brother and I, by I think it was Channel 10, cable channel, Fairfax County, asking us if they already had the name of the show. So they'd obviously been thinking about this before they reached out to us and said, would you guys be willing to do this on a Wednesday night, 30-minute show? And it was designed to be, we would kind of talk about the state of things. It was during football season, kind of recap the games from the previous week, talk about upcoming games. And the last few minutes was a call-in thing. And so I'm not sure I didn't think anybody was watching it, but I was shocked when people would stop me in the mall or something and say, oh, I love your show. I thought my mom was the only one watching. But yeah, we did it for a number of years. The only drawback was it was made for late Wednesday night, late Thursday night, because of JV and freshman. Friday was game night, and it was kicking both of our butts. So we did it for a number of years, and it was a lot of fun. But we had to step away from it. And I think then they got reporters took over it, and it became sports writers. So it kept on under a different brand.
Well, Brett Favre made some news today. I'm not sure if you heard it, but he was talking about the kids shouldn't play football until they're 14. And you started a little bit late. I talked to Andy Heck. He didn't play until he was in high school. Football is not one of these skill games where you have to learn early. Most things in football you can pick up late. Even quarterbacks or the more skilled positions, running backs, they can pick up late. What do you think the future is of football? What are steps that we can take to make sure the game survives and maybe even thrives? Going back to when there was 40 defensive backs trying out for Marshall back in the early 70s. So,
we're at a precarious time because some of the well-meaning changes have kind of backfired in that, football, learning to make an open field tackle is hard. Good player in open space, like Slick Bailey or whatever, it takes practice. You have to practice the skill, pass protection, getting off a block, shedding a block. Those are things that don't come natural. Yes, throwing and catching, every kid does that in the backyard. You're absolutely right. So there's a fine line between making sure that young football players have ample time to work on those fundamentals, which involves contact, and going overboard with it. So that's kind of finding the balance there. But it's unfair to not let a football player work on tackling and blocking, going live, and then throwing them in a game, which really ostensibly has not changed that much. Yes, there's the targeting rule, which is a newer rule, which they're still trying to figure out. So, some of the stuff is good. Like some of the things they've done with the youth leagues, I think it's in some ways a disadvantage by restricting their ability to work on fundamentals. And some of the studies, even Belichick's been even vocal about this, the pro level. Once through collective bargaining, they started reducing contact in practice, injuries skyrocketed because players weren't acclimated to it, weren't getting enough practice time on it. And if you're not it's just like if you had a pilot and you didn't give him a chance to practice takeoffs and landings, he's going to crash. If you're a baseball player and you don't let him do batting practice, you're not going to be able to hit the ball as well. So I'm somewhere in the middle on it.
20 years from now, do you think there'll be still football teams out in the country? I mean, obviously in the suburbs, we'll probably find enough kids to field football teams. Maybe not have freshman JV varsity, but maybe have JV varsity, whatever. But do you think in smaller markets where the schools aren't as big, 20 years from now, they'll still be able to field football teams?
Yeah, I don't know. I know this. I know that, college football is putting 100,000 people when there's not a pandemic in stadiums. Viewership is going up every year. At the high school level, I think football is still very popular, even though young people have more options now than they did when you and I were coming up. But I know that a lot of youth leagues are struggling to fill out teams. I do know that. And when you start to see that at your grassroots level, that can sometimes, the ripple effect, eventually is going to be felt. So, and football, has gotten a lot of bad publicity, much of it not deserved, about the safety aspects of it. Because the majority of football players, I mean, you've talked to Andy Hecht, who played 11 years in the NFL. Most of them, do we have some scars on our knees and some limps and stuff? But most of us would do it again, because the advantages outweigh the risks. So, I think I think football will always be popular. To what degree, I don't know.
Yeah. How about you talked about the weightlifting that you had, and you were able to really gain an advantage by having fit. And you were actually a weightlifting coach, or at least you had programs in which you supervised. Jerry Kramer, back for the Green Bay Packers, was a 255-pound guard. Nowadays a guard is probably 305 or whatever. At the high school level, the kids, when you played, you'd have linebackers 185. You'd have a quarterback may weigh 160. Do you think it's a better game because it's bigger? Do you think football was just as good in the 60s and in the 70s when the players were normal size?
Well, the game, if you look at the point production now, the game is much faster, much more wide open. It was a 14-7 game was kind of typical back then. Now you look at the plethora of points put on the board. So, I think the game, kids are out throwing the ball more and catching, and high schools are throwing the ball more, and passing leagues, 7-on-7 leagues. And coaches, it seemed like everybody had, when I was playing, most teams were 2 back, 21 personnel, tight end, 2 receivers. Nobody was zone blitzing. There's so many innovations to the game now. I think the game is, more wide open. But like I said before, I think the foundation of the game's about you still got to be strong to play the game, because sooner or later you still got to block, you still got to break a tackle, you still got to make a tackle. So, the strength and conditioning aspect is as important as it's always been, frankly. Mm-hmm. But the game, offensively has changed and the defense changes. But, it's funny because you look at teams that bring back some of those old concepts, like Stonebridge back when I was coaching was running a single wing, at least his version of it. They were going to the state final. I mean, people that were having success running option were still having success. So it's funny how some of those concepts and principles can still work, even at the college level. You look at the success Army's had, 2019 or 18, they number 5 ranked Oklahoma, they took into overtime. They had Michigan beat when Michigan was a top 10 school. Georgia Tech under Paul Johnson running the spread option, twice finished the season ranked in the top 10, won 11 games. And some of the issues on both of those teams were defensively, not offense, from putting them over, into playing for a national championship. So some of those concepts some of those principles are still current.
Yeah. Well, but the weight and speed training that you do, is it made the game safer or more dangerous? And what I mean is that weight and speed, isn't it used more as weapons than it is as a prevention thing to make you safer?
There's no question players are bigger, stronger, and faster. I don't think
Hmm.
anybody can dispute that, which is going to make the contact, is you're going to have some pretty big collisions. Um,
Yeah.
are there more injuries? I don't know, that because
Mhm.
part of me says some of the uptick in injuries is due to the way we practice. Before, coaches were pretty good about giving you, I know with Coach Hilgert as a coach, we was contact every day, but you also felt pretty confident in what you need and how you transferred that over to a game. So, it's like I said, it's kind of a double-edged sword because extensively the football is still the same game. Um,
Yeah.
so, and I think the people who are with with a game of football, I think people in the NFL, college and high school, the national federations, and the competition committees are struggling with this. And some of my brother and I were talking, and he said, people practice differently now a lot, and is it a good thing or a bad thing? That's a debate.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
personally, if I went back into coaching, I think I would probably try to coach the same way because I think it's what we did was safe. And what we did was put players in the best position to succeed. And, there's so many things that you can do with players. Quick whistle. You don't have to take players to the ground. You can reduce the distance between players. You can be cognizant of the matchups between the sizes of players and the age. There's so many other things you can do to keep it safe. I was a big proponent of walkthroughs, you know, just what we
Mhm.
called assignment check. So you don't have to be
Mhm.
banging all the time.
Do you have any current involvement in football right now?
To the extent that I still have former players and assistant coaches that are coaching, and they'll still reach out and go, "Hey, can you, run me through how we did our punt team, our punt protection again?" Had that just this last week, and I kind of like it because I can get a football fix. And one of the nice things about not coaching is you can go to the game of the week. And I've got another former player who played for me at Robinson, Chip Vaughn, who's up coaching with the Jets. I'm going to try to get up there and see one of his games. My brother's oldest is here at Salisbury University. So I still, do I miss coaching? Yes. And I, miss that contact with the players and the coaches for sure. Um, I don't necessarily miss the 85-hour weeks and 4 hours of sleep, and I miss the competition part too. Um, but I don't regret my decision to get out.
Mm. Are you on the Eastern Shore? You said Salisbury. That's at Salisbury, Maryland. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
but I'm
nice.
close to the water though. They're about 50 minutes away from me,
Okay. Oh, where are you living now?
near Bethany Beach.
Oh, I love it there. Oh, well,
Yeah,
next
very nice.
time, yeah. I mean, pre-pandemic, we'd go every summer and stay at the Sea Colony, and
Mhm.
I also have friends there. So next time, maybe next time I'm telling we can go grab a beer and we can. I know you want to do this in person. It would have been great.
Yeah.
But so when I decided I was going to start doing football podcast, the first one I did was Andy Heck, because Andy Heck was a basketball player. So I knew Andy. We played against each other in basketball. You're the first uh, full football guy that I did. I had to do you first because you had an amazing record. You're a Robinson guy, and you've really done some great things in my alma mater. So we're really proud of our team and your record there.
Well, Julian, I appreciate the opportunity. I hesitated because I'm not sure anybody, is interested in what I have to say, other than maybe some of the guys that played for me. And, even though we went an hour and a half or whatever, I wish I'd have gotten to talk more about some of those Mount Vernon players and Chantilly players and Robinson players individually. The Mike Emos and the John Remishevskis and the Frank
Yeah.
Smiths, and Sean Scotts, and all those guys. There's just not time to do it. But I look back on my career. I can't believe they paid me to do it. It was that rewarding and satisfying and fun too. And that doesn't mean there weren't challenges. and, sleepless nights. But by and large, and I talked about it, I think fate or God tapped me on the shoulder and kind of steered me towards this. And I'm so happy. I didn't make a lot of money, but I have relationships that I cherish greatly from it.
Yeah, I like to look at it as coaches are they might not make tons of money for the time they spend coaching, unless I guess you're in the pro level, college level, but they're richly rewarded in the influence that they have on the people that they coach. And the coaches that I have talked to since I started doing this, I mean, the memories that they keep with them, the relationships, as you mentioned, that you have, and then with social media, it's so easy for you to be in touch with all your players now. And hopefully our Facebook group will help facilitate that. I know we did on the basketball side. I'm sorry we didn't get to more of your players. But what I'd like to do is at some point get several of you coaches on a call at one time. You and maybe Pete. Obviously, I can do these coaches one-on-one as well. But I like to get a group of you on a call. Or I did Mount Vernon basketball. Have a group of players and a coach as well. I'm doing Lee Lewis basketball this week as well. So hopefully there'll be time for us to do that. And if you started talking about your players, you're going to forget some. You're going to leave some out anyway. So
Yeah.
You've had so many great players. How are you going to talk about all of them?
Well, it's just like I already remembered. I forgot Neil Hamilton, who was that defensive end on that Mount Vernon team when I was trying to name off those guys. It's inevitable, but I've been blessed the last few years. Since I retired, I've probably been to about 25 weddings of former players. And, that is the best part, is that after you coach, that relationship, if anything, gets stronger. And, the trophies get dusty, but the relationships don't. And I think that's what the wins, and, people ask me about specific games and scores, and it's great memories, but it's the relationships that I cherish the most.
Yeah, I remember when you introduced Mike Email for the Hall of Fame, and you did a great story and about some of the things that Mike did. I can't remember exactly, but then it must have gave you a lot of pride to hear Mike speak. I never heard Mike speak before. I think I may have coached him in summer league for basketball one year. I don't remember for sure. There's another kid named Deshaun Eccles that played around the same time. Sometimes I forgot which one I coached, which one I didn't coach. But that night, Mike gave the most amazing speech. I'm like, man, this guy he's amazing. He was a great athlete, but also just a great guy and a really charismatic speaker.
He's very polished, and he was, even as a young person, he was obviously one of the captains of that state championship team his senior year. And then he continued that, down at Virginia Tech. He was in the media quite a bit. He would be a good one for you to get on. He's he was a heck of an athlete prior to high school. I'd already heard about him, and I put him on the varsity as a freshman. Probably was a little bit premature, but great high school career.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I'll reach out to Mike. That's actually a good idea. So, but anyway,
sure he would do it. He would do it.
Oh yeah. I would love to talk to him. I didn't get a chance to talk to him that night. I think I just gave my regards. But that's a special moment. Hopefully we can get back to the Hall of Fame now that the COVID's over. Maybe we can get have a class for next year.
Yeah, there are some guys like Adam Fasnacht, who was a 3-time All-Met and lacrosse, wrestling, and football. We need to get him in there. Chip Vaughn, who's got a Super Bowl ring, he should be in there. There's a bunch. We're behind, and we do need to get caught up. You're right, and athletes from other sports as well.
Yeah. Also, Michael Johnson, running back I guess he was the late '80s. A guy I played basketball with named Jeff Bowling. He played at Air Force. He was a great player. But the problem with Robinson, the school is so big. We have success in so many sports. So Joel Dempsey got into the Hall of Fame. It was interesting. And my sister went in, and my mother was there and it was an amazing moment for our family. Thank you for any role you had in that. But the first thing my mom said is, "Where's Joel Dempsey?" And so the next time we had a lunch, I was like, "Guys, we forgot Joel Dempsey." I mean, but Joel was the guy that was forgotten, but he started for UVA for 4 years. He kicked the tight end. There's just so many players that Robinson had in so many different sports. I mean, I'm sure there are there are cross country athletes that we've forgotten about, golfers, tennis players. It's just so many.
Well, the first thing, not to drag this thing out, but when the Robinson Hall of Fame was started, they had a pretty good rule. They have a pretty good rule in place, in that you got to be 15 years out of school to be considered. And the rationale behind it is get those early folks in first before we start talking about some of these more recent, because you're right, the Kirtleys and the Krenitskys and the Chris Warrens and the Rob Musios and all of those guys and girls, like your sister from that era and those teams too, I personally believe that they should be in there before we start talking about the more recent folks. But we're getting to that point now, like for example, that '01 football team that won the state championship, that's now 20 years. It's hard to believe. So
they're in the 40s now. They're almost 40 years. We're almost 40 years old now. Yeah.
You got to start almost, depending on what grade they were. So, but Robinson, you're right, has such a rich history and tradition in so many sports, and it's a matter of the nomination, but it'll happen over time. It will. I mean, Mount Vernon's the same way. That school goes back to 1945. So that's a long time.
Yeah. Well, again, Coach, I'm going to, next time you're in town, let me know. Maybe we can meet up. But if not, I will definitely I'll look you up next time I'm at the beach.
Please do, Julian. Great talking.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thanks a lot for doing this, Coach.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Have a great day. Okay, buddy.
You too.